in the lead up to this show, it's funny because what happens is either myself or one of our producers does talent scouting, and they put profiles across to me, and they're like, "Oh, do you think this?" I'll say this person would be good for the show, or Matthias will say, "Oh, this person might be good. What do you think?" And I saw your profile, and I clicked through and had a quick look at your TED Talk and read a bit about your bio, and I was like, "Yes, I would love to have that conversation. It's fascinating." And it was really funny because I did all the prep in the last couple of days, just like watching a couple of the videos and getting my head around what I wanted to talk about. But it was really interesting because 2 days ago, 3 or 4 days ago, my best mate and I caught up at my other mate's kid's birthday party, and my mate's on steroids for the first time. He's like 34, 35, and he's like, looks like a fucking juice head. And anyway, and I don't know how we got onto it, but he's like, "Mate, do you know how much the whole world has changed?" He goes, "I buy my steroids off the dark web." And I was like, "Dead set." And he goes, "Yeah, but..." And he doesn't really, take party drugs much anymore, but we did when we were growing up together. But he still does sometimes. So if he's got like a wedding or whatever, he'll like buy a bag of Coke or whatever. And he goes, "Bro, I buy my fucking bags of Coke off the dark web." He goes, "The mailman delivers it." And this is the first I'd heard of it.
Yeah.
And then only a couple of days later, I'm talking to you and actually going deep into it. But it's so fascinating. So talk to us about... I've never even been on the dark web. I don't know how to do it. My mate from the conversation a few days ago was kind of, breaking it down for me. But it's always been so... foreign to me. So how do you actually get on the dark web?
It's easy. And it's not illegal to get on the dark web. All you need to do is you download this thing called a Tor browser, which is... I'm not a computer scientist, by the way. I'll just put that out there. But, know the basics of how the technology works, what it can do. And it's basically... it's like a different internet browser, like a Chrome or a Safari or something. Yeah. But it uses this special network which is the Tor network, the dark web. And basically what it does is it scrambles your IP address. So instead, usually when you log on to the internet, unless you're using a VPN or something, who you are, where you're located, it all comes down to this unique identifying number that's attached to your computer. So, if you send a death threat or, do something else illegal online, the cops will be able to trace it back to that number. Yep. But once you're on the dark web, that number is effectively, scrambled. And the encryption that they use is incredibly simple. It's free. But it's also very powerful. To do like a blunt force attack on it, you need like a supercomputer in 10,000 years to crack this code. If you're using it correctly, there are vulnerabilities and weaknesses in the system, but they're very difficult to exploit.
Really, that's fascinating. Because always, I've used VPNs for different bits and pieces in the past, like downloading stuff or like some other, whatever it is, trying to get on like Netflix of Europe because it's better than Australia, And they seem to break every now and again, but the dark web, not always, they're pretty good. But the dark web is basically impenetrable IP-wise. You won't be found.
If you're using it right, yep.
Cool. Full on. So where did I think probably 10 years ago I started hearing about the dark web and people buying drugs, and it was through the Silk Road or Silk Road or whatever it was called. And I never went on there, and I kind of thought that it must have just fizzled out. It must have been kind of like the Pirate Bay, even though you can still download stuff off the Pirate Bay, but that was a pirate site, and then it got harder and harder and cracked down, and then now... I don't know, you can kind of probably still download stuff from it. But I thought that would happen with the dark web and buying drugs, but it's the opposite. Is that right?
It is the opposite. Yeah, it's bigger now than it's ever been.
Really?
And it's that's kind of the narrative, I guess, that law enforcement wants to put out there. And when they cracked down on Silk Road, they were like, right, this is proved that the dark web drug trade is over. No one's beyond the long arm of the law. Yeah. And instead, it was the opposite. What Ross Ulbricht, the guy who got busted for being Dread Pirate Roberts, the guy who started the site.
Okay.
What he did essentially was just prove actually that this is a viable business model. He made $80 million in Bitcoin in about 2 years. And oh God, if he had those Bitcoins, that was Bitcoin value back then, it would be worth dollars.
That's $1 trillion.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, it would be in the billions.
It actually probably would be something like that.
It would probably be in the billions.
In the billions, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, where did you come into it? Yeah. So, how come you ended up looking at dark web?
Yeah. So, when I got back from Africa, and I was like, all right, I need a different area of research. And it's funny because academics usually get siloed pretty quickly. You figure out a specialty and a niche, and you sort of sit there. And it's an unusual situation where you're sort of like, okay, I know I don't want to do this. I'm looking for something else. And even more unusual, there's something new comes on the scene. And I remember reading about it. There was there's a famous piece in Gawker that sort of unveiled it, and to the rest of the wider world. And I remember going on Google Scholar, which is, the academics sort of sites about what peer-reviewed papers out there, and there was basically nothing there. There was one letter to the editor of a magazine written by someone who I work with quite a lot now. Actually, both the papers that were there, were people who I've done research with now, but there was basically no criminological work done on it. There was no real conceptualization of it. There was no, all right, what does this mean for drug trafficking? What does this mean if it keeps growing? So it was like, kind of age of discovery, finding new land with no flags on it yet. Like, wow, okay, great. So I got to work, and I managed to write the first book in the world about it, and a bunch of other papers since then. And it's been sort of the golden goose ever since.
So for people that don't know, so what does the actual, like if say on the weekend, I want to go and buy drugs, who am I buying them from? What's the process like? Talk to us about what it actually looks like.
Yeah, sure.
In the thick of it.
So the sort of common way that it's described in the media is like an eBay of illicit drugs, and it's actually a really good analogy because the darknet marketplaces or crypto markets, they don't sell anything themselves. They just host this secure infrastructure the same way that eBay does.
Yep.
And unlike eBay, the only sort of significant difference, I guess, eBay's got the bidding system, whereas on these sites, people just, you create a seller page. So if you've got some crack you want to sell or some, whatever, you go onto the site, you create a seller page, you sometimes pay like a registration fee, might be $100, something like that.
Yeah. And
then you create your page. You take some photos of, of what you want to sell. You write your little spiel. Here's our, guarantee to customers, blah, blah, blah. And then if you want to buy something, you create a buyer account, which are free. And then you go, all right, I want to buy some crack for this weekend or, some pot. Most of it's actually pot. That's the biggest product category.
Yeah.
And then you go, right, I want to buy it from, you can search by location. So, quite often, particularly in Australia, people won't want to buy from dealers who are located overseas because they either don't want to wait, 3 weeks or something to arrive from Europe, or they don't want to take the risk of it coming through customs, which are lower typically than people think. But still, you don't want to spend 3 weeks necessarily wondering the whole time whether it's been intercepted or not. Right. So you might just limit your search to local dealers. But the sort of genius of the way the sites work is just the same as eBay or Uber. It's all about customer feedback and ratings. So the dealers will say, hey, look, whatever happens, the top dealers will be like, please don't give us a bad rating. If you're not happy with the product or the service somehow, get in touch with us. We'll sort you out, because their rating is basically how they attract customers.
Yeah.
So that system incentivizes behavior in a really different kind of way. It's a bit like I don't know if you remember in Melbourne before we had Uber.
I know the analogy you're about to make 100%.
Yeah, I mean, taxis were just a nightmare, right?
And the way people would treat taxi drivers also.
Vice versa, customers
100%.
would treat taxi drivers like shit, and taxi drivers wouldn't pick customers up.
Yeah, you weren't on the hook.
If you're in the city at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to get home,
I remember it.
It was nearly impossible.
People would laugh at you. Where are you going? And I'd say, I'm going on the Mornington Peninsula. Yeah. And I'd get in and go, oh, actually, you know what? Scrap that. Just take me down the road.
Yeah. And,
Because you couldn't get them otherwise.
Yeah, I'm not an altercation person. I had altercations in that situation because the system was bad.
Yep.
And then Uber comes along, and often, it's exact same customers, often the same drivers. People used to drive for taxis, driving for Ubers. You're getting from A to B in a car, but suddenly it all works.
Yeah.
And
fascinating.
Similarly, do we see something on the darknet? There was the first sort of big quantitative study. So, they're actually sucking up all because we can see all this data. And so some of the people I work with, they're pretty savvy quantitative researchers, programmers and whatnot. They create these programs that basically hoover up all of the data, and then we can analyze it. We can analyze, a particular drug dealer's career or the whole drug trade going through a particular site or all the sites. And the first study that was done on this, they found that on Silk Road, I think it was over the course of like 30,000 transactions over the course of a year, something like that. It was 97.8% of the transactions had either a 4 or a 5-star rating in terms of customer satisfaction.
That's doing great business.
Yeah, I mean, that's a low customer satisfaction. I think any enterprise.
NPS, great NPS scores.
Yeah.
Man, that's so funny.